Hello all, welcome to the latest edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast in association with Future Radio 107.8 FM. And Merry Christmas to you all. We come to you just a couple of days before the big day. We haven't got a game to review, of course. The West Ham match was postponed because of Norwich's COVID outbreak, but we do have one to look forward to. As things stand, Arsenal due at Carrow Road on Boxing Day. But Paddy, Connor are with me as usual, and I suppose the main thing as we sit here right now, Paddy, is whether the fans will be there, whether behind closed doors games are depressingly not too far away. Once again, I remember saying on this pod not that long ago that hopefully we'd seen the last of Norwich City games behind closed doors, because I never want to see one again. But as we sit here today, we can't say with 100% certainty that they're not going to be coming back quite soon.
No, Dave, no, this, just to clarify, it is Wednesday afternoon as we sit here. And and as we sit here, games in Wales have gone behind closed doors in the last 24, 48 hours. That's been announced. Scotland as well, I think they've indicated on Tuesday, is it 500 in the grounds? I haven't looked in detail, but I'm not sure whether that includes obviously players, staff, officials. But if it does or doesn't, it's a very small sample of supporters. So if the countries bordering England are going down that route, then you have to expect that at some point beyond Christmas, because the latest from the government and the Prime Minister is that there'll be no need for any further lockdown-esque restrictions this side of Christmas, whatever the political reasonings for that. But in terms of if that is the messaging that they're putting out, then I think we can safely assume Boxing Day, Carrow Road, supporters will be in attendance. But thereafter, we've just had in the last few days, there's a number of Premier League clubs who didn't really want to be playing the next fixture, which is the 28th, 29th, 30th. They wanted if you want to call it a mini circuit breaker. But the overriding view of the Premier League is that the fixtures will have to be, if at all possible, fulfilled. But ultimately, we're in a holding pattern, as always, with this pandemic, and nobody can really predict with any great certainty where we will be in 2, 3, 4 weeks. So, as it stands, all we can say is hopefully we won't be in a situation where it is either partial or full closures of stadiums. I think my own personal opinion is the games will continue because of the whole element of the broadcast deals around it and the games having to be on for TV purposes. So I think I don't envisage any scenario where the games themselves, as it happened at the very start of the pandemic, where we had that pause for 2-3 months and the season was suspended. I don't think we'll get to that point, but you have to be realistic in it, and it does feel that obviously subject to where we are now in the next 2 to 3 week period with rising COVID cases and this Omicron variant, and obviously the booster rollout, all of those elements will come together, potentially could result in games in England having either less supporters or no supporters. And the last thing I'd say on this one is, interestingly, as I say, it's Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday morning, Mikel Arteta, Norwich's next opponents, manager of Arsenal, he was asked about this at his presser this morning, and specifically about playing in front of no supporters, and he said he really, really hopes we don't get back to that point, because it isn't the same sport. And I think we're in a privileged position, but having experienced that through Project Restart, he's right, it isn't the same sport. It's a very hollow experience, and we just hope against hope that despite the measures that are now looking to be adopted in Wales and Scotland, that doesn't come to England, because for a whole lot of reasons that wouldn't be a great development, would it? So it's a worrying time, but ultimately, if we deal in the here and now, we expect Carrow Road to be a full house on Boxing Day.
I just hope we don't get a few weeks down the road and then football is being partly blamed for the spike of Omicron, and that a lot of people then get infected from it and stuff, and then we do end up going down. So, say this with a heavy pinch of salt, but you've got to hope that the government make the right call in this situation. It's not an easy call. But anyway, let's try and avoid any more COVID talk, because we're all sick of it, aren't we? It permeates our lives unavoidably now, inside and outside of football. And the big thing, of course, Connor, is this is a difficult game. Arsenal have won 4 games in the spin. They're up to 4th. They finally think their faith in Arteta seems to be being paid off. But as we head into this one, of course, Christmas Eve press conference is going to be where we find out the big news, isn't it, in terms of who's back. But the club have put out a video with a few clues for us, haven't they?
Yes, they have, which is nice of them, particularly in the job that we do. I think supporters will be looking for 2 names in particular, won't they? Milo Rashica and Matthias Norman. A few people were eagle-eyed enough to see that Max Aarons wasn't training. Obviously we'll find out on Friday, but from what we believe, I don't think that's anything to be too duly concerned about ahead of Boxing Day. So that's a positive. If Norwich could get those 2 back theoretically, I would maybe argue more Rashica, given their struggles at the top end of the pitch, and certainly the noises at the moment are encouraging about his fitness. So hopefully that goes in the right direction. They get him back, because if we see the player that we saw before he got injured, where it just looked like he was just beginning to look like the player that we all thought Norwich had signed in the summer, then that may just add something, an element at the top end of the pitch that they so desperately need. And I think anyone that watches Norwich City knows how much they need that, a bit of pace, a bit of creativity, a bit of something different in the final third, because at the moment it's very difficult to see where the goals are coming from. Beyond Teemu Pukki, and that's the damning statement, isn't it? If Teemu Pukki doesn't score, then neither do Norwich City. Well, before his injury, it was beginning to feel like if Teemu Pukki or Milo Rashica didn't either score or produce something, that Norwich City weren't scoring. So, let's hope we see him back. I mean, the caveat to that is we're talking about a player who has 1 assist in the Premier League, still yet to score, and that was a corner. So, again, even if we see an improvement in terms of his output, part of me feels that that's not going to be enough in terms of what Norwich City need. It needs to be a real sea change in terms of output, not just from Rashica, not just from Pukki, but from 3 or 4 players: Josh Sargent, Adamida, Christos Scholes, who was in that training video. So it looks like he's going to come back after his COVID infection. So hopefully a squad that resembles a bit more, it looks a bit closer to the one that Dean Smith would choose if all his options were available, because obviously the circumstances and whatnot that the Aston Villa game was played under, with players on the pitch and on the bench who are feeling unwell. The amount of players out, obviously if they'd have gone to West Ham, the game that got called off, I think it's more than likely we'd have seen 23 players in the starting lineup. John Rowe, probably one of those who maybe would have been given the nod. The bench would have been full of kids as well. There were 9 players at Colney training last week. So yeah, hopefully they're coming through that period now, and as Paddy says, we look towards a more positive one. But if they could get Milo Rashica back, Matthias Norman, let's see. That would be, I think, a huge boost for everyone ahead of what is a very busy festive schedule.
Would be. And at the mention of Max Aarons, I will flag, if you haven't already found it, we now also record a bonus pod, the PinkUn Podcast Extra Time, which we have christened the Monday Night Club, where we drill down into a bit of specific analysis, and we discussed whether Norwich should sell Max this January if a good bid comes in, which is obviously a debatable thing in itself, with whether anyone will have much money to spend this January or not. But should Roma, or one of the many hundreds of clubs that he's been linked with, Barcelona, Inter Milan, Bayern Munich, the list goes on and on, if one of them should stump up the money, should they sell him to reinvest, to strengthen, to try and stay up this year? So that was the big debating point. That is available exclusively to PinkUn Plus subscribers. I'm sure you've heard us all banging on about it in recent weeks, but that is $1.99 a month or £20 up front for the year, and you hopefully will be seeing sort of the pattern of that emerging now, which stuff is available exclusively, and that will continue to develop over the months ahead. But looking at Arsenal's results, Pad, they beat Southampton 3-0 at home, West Ham 2-0 at home, then thrashed Leeds 4-1 on Saturday evening, and then there was this game Tuesday night where they was it the quarterfinals of the League Cup? They smashed Sunderland 5-1, Eddie Nketiah getting a hat-trick and a lot of changes and stuff. But it feels like they had laid quite a bit of groundwork with Mikel Arteta, hadn't they? They had seen that if they stuck with him and allowed him to build a long-term project, that they would get their sort of just rewards for it long term. And it does feel like he is now building some momentum. I mean, they're not going to challenge for the title this year, but if he got them into the Champions League, that would be significant for them, wouldn't it?
Certainly in recent times, yeah, kind of post, well, even towards the end of the Wenger reign, where they were serial qualifiers for the Champions League, to the detriment of Wenger, really, because it was almost like, was that the height of their ambitions? I think it was something ridiculous, like 15 or 16 seasons on the trot, they got in the top four and qualified. But be careful what you wish for, because since then it has been a pretty fallow period, and yeah, the signs look good. And it's interesting that obviously now, you know, people are looking at Arsenal as, yeah, that looks like a club back on the up with good young homegrown players. There's been a lot of talk about their type of recruitment, and almost they're trying to go, dare I say it, the Norwich route rather than buy ready-made, you know, off the shelf top end labels, price tags, and develop both good young players from their own academy and obviously bring in one or two. Of course, the caveat to that is they can still go out and spend 50 million on Ben White. So they've still, it's all relative, isn't it? But you only have to go back to when Norwich, this reverse fixture, I think it was September, Norwich went there above Arsenal in the table. Arsenal were rock bottom, huge questions on Arteta. Almost it felt, looking at some reports going into that game, that his job was on the line. If they hadn't beaten Norwich, he probably was out of a job. Now, we'll never know the veracity of that, because they scraped to win. It was that late kind of VAR intervention goal that separated the sides that day, and of course he's never looked back, because since then they've gone on a very, very good run, and they are probably one of if not the form side in the division. So it just shows, that, you know, if you believe that you've got the right people in the key positions in a football club, you just got to back them and stick with them, and then over time, hopefully, start to see the fruits of that, support if you're the Arsenal hierarchy. And but it was interesting. Again, I referenced it earlier. Arteta's done his media already for Boxing Day earlier today, and he's reading between the lines. It looked like he was having to just dampen down the rising expectation, because there are clearly, you know, people who feel that maybe Arsenal can go on now and challenge the big boys this season, and he was very keen to sort of keep feet on the ground and reiterate that there's a lot of things they still have to get better at as a club, and as a result, you know, probably not don't run before you can walk kind of vibe. So yeah, it feels like a tough game in store for Norwich, but ultimately I think now it feels it's more about what Norwich do or don't do, rather than, you know, worrying too much about the opponents they're coming up against. You know, ultimately, you look at these next three games, and if they go on in some shape or form, Arsenal at home, Palace away, Leicester away, none of those look particularly easy or favourable for me. You know, all of those are good players, good clubs, good coaches as well. You know, so really, you know, Dean Smith done a little bit of talking and said that, you know, this is like almost the moving period now. If Norwich could come through this next festive swing of three games, I don't know what represents for me a good haul, maybe 5 points out of those 9. You know,
I'd take that all day long.
Yeah, exactly. Then it re-energises, you know, the sense and the belief around the camp and inside the camp, maybe, that okay, yep, we can still have a say at the bottom of the table, rather than it goes the other way. Dare I say, you come out of the 3 games we're talking about there with no points or 1 point on the board. You have to think that other clubs will kick on a little bit down the bottom, and then it looks probably beyond them already. So I don't think it's overstating it to say that these next 3 games through this festive spell are, in the bigger picture, massive for Norwich. And obviously Arsenal's the first one. And, you know, as you quoted there, you know, they arrive on the back of 4 wins, place in the League Cup semi-finals, full of confidence. Young players who really are enjoying themselves. By no manner of means is this an easy assignment for Norwich.
No, 3 defeats on the spin, 1 goal in 5 games. We've all had a while to dwell on those figures now, haven't we, because of the postponed game. We don't know when that West Ham match will be arranged for yet. Obviously, we've got to worry about getting these games on to start with. But it feels to me like if they don't win at least one of these 3, then it's going to take something really, really special. I mean, it's still strange that we're sat here today and there are only 3 points adrift of safety with a healthy goal difference swing lead as well. So let's say 4, and they're 6 points from lead. So they are still very much within. I mean, if they were to somehow win 2 of these games, they are cooking. But we've been saying things like that for a little while, haven't we? So it's almost about following on to everything that you were saying a few minutes ago, Connor, looking at what is available to them, trying to make sense of the 11 when it drops on, hopefully, on Boxing Day afternoon, and going from there. The quotes you mentioned, Paddy, we'll just quickly read them. I won't do a Mikel Arteta impression.
That's a shame.
I think they deserve much more from many, many games in recent games as well. Under Dean, they deserve better results and they haven't got them. And we know at their place it will be a really difficult game. If the crowd is there as well, you know how special it is on Boxing Day. So expect a tough match. So good to hear that little bit of respect. If I dig into your memory banks a little bit, Connor, from the game at the Emirates, which was in September, I was at my mate's wedding paying absolutely no attention to it and paying more attention to the beer on that occasion. So I'm relying on you for this one. But I watched the replay back the highlights back the other day, and yeah, that goal was really unfortunate, wasn't it? But my recollection of it is that Arsenal were pretty dominant, weren't they?
Yes, I think they were. From memory, I think that was Andrew Bamidele's Premier League debut. I think maybe it's certainly his first Premier League start. Yeah, which was, and he was very good. There were some big calls as well. Todd Cantwell dropped out. No Billy Gilmore. I think that was just after Kabak had signed, so I don't think he'd come into the side. No, he was on the bench. So it kind of felt Kieran Dow started as well, even though Rashica was on the bench and whatnot. So yeah, it was an interesting one. It was probably a period where Norwich hadn't quite bedded in the signings. Obviously, it came during that tricky start to the season, didn't it? So I think compared to other games against other kind of teams that are up there, this was a lot more encouraging. I remember Brandon Williams being particularly good that afternoon against Nicolas Pepe, and Norwich defended pretty well. But again, you've put the stats up in front of us. One shot off target, or one shot on target rather, 3 shots off target. It just goes to show that maybe those attacking issues were already there. But
that was a Kenny McLean header as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and there's no doubt in my mind that both teams are in different positions now than they were in that game. Paddy mentioned Arsenal were rock bottom. There was a lot of pressure around Mikel Arteta. The relief that came out of the Emirates at the final whistle was quite something. Norwich there was a lot more encouragement around them. The new additions, obviously Kabak had come in. There was a lot of excitement about the potential within this squad, and now it feels like it's kind of flipped, and the excitement is with Arsenal, and it's now Norwich who are under a little bit of pressure and need to find a result from somewhere. And like you say, we keep talking about if has to become when at some point, or it needs to become now, really. But yeah, I mean, I just find myself coming back to asking myself, do I think they have enough in attacking areas? And at the moment, I don't really. They're not causing teams enough problems, and even though Dean Smith has improved them, I think you only have to watch them play to see them. They're a much more competitive outfit now, consistently, than they were at this stage. I think under Daniel Farke, they look at, and again, not being disrespectful to Daniel Farke, but they do look a better coach team now in terms of what the Premier League requires. They're a lot more effective off the ball, but the issues at the top end of the pitch still persist. And ultimately, if you can't score a goal in football, then you're going to find yourself in real trouble. So, yeah, if they can, and again, I mean, one element, encouraging element, attacking wise, I think is set pieces. That's something that I think has visibly improved under Dean Smith.
Well, Heta put into good corners, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, and a good cross in the first half as well. So there are encouraging signs. It's just you hope it's not too little, too late, and it feels like there's going to be a lot of focus on January when potentially not a lot could happen. So that's difficult. But yeah, this game in particular, I think was the beginning that I think I'm trying to think, Pat. It was the first game Todd was left out, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that was Zolas's. If it wasn't his first,
he was quite bright outing, that day, wasn't he?
His first start, certainly. Yeah.
So I mean, it was, and Gilmore was on the bench as well. So it was probably the beginning of, I don't want to say the beginning of the end for Daniel Farke, but we were beginning to see the trends with players that maybe fans would later on question. But as a performance away at the Emirates, I mean, whenever you go to one of those top 6 sides, and you're competitive, which Norwich were that afternoon, didn't really offer much of an attacking threat, but they were well in the game. As you said, very unfortunate goal that they conceded. It could have easily been a point. and who knows what that would have done for their confidence in the games going forward. So, I think it was probably a lot better than some other performances that we saw against Liverpool and Manchester City. But I think as we know now, those two are on a completely different level to probably everyone else in the league.
Well, it'll be very interesting. They clearly have some very good players. Bukayo Saka, so good for England in the summer. Emile Smith-Rowe is doing brilliantly for them. Ødegaard, Tierney, Ramsdale's done excellently since he's arrived there as well, hasn't he? I just feel with Arsenal that they don't have the consistency. They're not a title contender at all as far as I'm concerned. If they can get that fourth spot, it'd be excellent for them. But if Norwich can turn up with a performance that they're capable of, like they did against Wolves, I think we can probably forget about the Villa one, which was dreadful, and we now know that there were basically players on that pitch who shouldn't have been, or certainly that's how the club see it. I think someone like Munulis on the bench, Gilmour was on the pitch feeling pretty grotty, and that was not really a genuine reflection of who Norwich City actually are, as we'd seen against Manchester United just a few days earlier as well. So as much as that game has created a lot of doom and gloom, I feel like if they play like they did against United and against Wolves, definitely not Villa and Newcastle, then they can cause them problems, and there is still going to be vulnerabilities to Arsenal. They aren't the finished product at all, so let's just hope that Norwich can turn up.
Welcome to the new normal.
Hello, and welcome to this series of Unfinished with me, Charles Thompson.
Welcome to Weird Norfolk.
Welcome to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast.
From true crime to football, politics to folklore, for more great podcasts from Archant, head to audioboom.com/channel/Archant.
We'll park it there for now in terms of the Boxing Day game. What I wanted to do is because of this busy period that's about to follow, 3 games in 7 days, I'm not sure we'll really get the opportunity to do this. So I wanted to just have a look back over 2021, really, because so much has happened. I mean, the title win feels like ancient history to me now. Just meters from where... meters from the press box. When it was still behind closed doors, we were seeing Norwich players popping the champagne corks and Daniel Farke drinking beer and soaked in beer and having the ice bucket chucked over him and all that sort of stuff. The fans gathering outside. That, to me, that just seems like a different lifetime ago. So I've got the fixtures in front of me, and I just thought we'd go through them for a bit of an informal 2021 in review, really. And right from the start, I look at those first fixtures at the start of the year, beating Barnsley 1-0 at home and Coventry 2-0 in the Cup, won 2-1 at Cardiff. There was COVID around then, wasn't there? Tim Krul missed games, Mumba, Ida, several players. McLean, they were battling with it right from then, and we were behind closed doors. But that seems a good one to start with, Pad. The 2-1 win at Cardiff, early header from Hanley, Cantwell scored a good goal, and that was when Dan Barden was in goal as well, wasn't it? So again, as I was just sort of saying, this all feels like a long time ago, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, you've mentioned him there. You're talking about Norwich's year. It condensed down the year from that man's viewpoint. Come out of nowhere really because of injury / COVID related absences from McGovern and for Tim Krul around that time of year. They brought in Orjan Nyland, didn't they? Former Villa keeper, but he wasn't fit when he arrived and subsequently never actually played a game for Norwich. So a lad who I think had been at Bury Town, many rungs down the football ladder, found himself thrust into... I think he played originally... That was it, he came on for McGovern, didn't he? It was at the QPR game a week or two back, prior to that, half-time, and then FA Cup I remember he played, but it was the Cardiff game because, Cardiff, always a very, very difficult place to go. I think Kiefer Moore was... quite a totemic figure for them last season, and you just feared that a direct side, I think it was Neil Harris was still in charge there, wasn't it, at that time? And
Nick McCarthy would have been them, wouldn't it?
No, I think it might have been Neil Harris.
It was Harris.
Yeah, it was Harris, yeah. Okay. But either way, they're cut from the same cloth, those two. So you feared that could that be a game where Norwich would slip up, and they were... I remember watching that. I don't think we made the trip, as I recall. I remember us all sat in our various
That's right, yeah.
home offices dotted around Norfolk watching that game on a feed, and Norwich were excellent, scored early. I think Cantwell scored that day, didn't he?
Yeah, he did,
Hugo was involved as well, if I'm not mistaken. And Big Grant scored from a header, didn't he? That's it, a Vrancic corner. But then, as you would have expected, they really were under the pump there in the final quarter, and Barden was excellent, so commanding, so assured. But of course, we know how sadly his year was to end, where he's gone out on loan to Livingston. Looked like he was set fair to really push on again. Highly thought of, obviously by Daniel Farke as it was at the time, but the club in general. Sadly for him, the health issues, diagnosed with testicular cancer. And funny enough, just before we recorded this, we've had a bit of an update that things are progressing very well, and touch wood, hopefully next season he should be able to return to the fold. So that's great news to end the year for him as well, because for such a young man, an episode to have to go through really in your life, when everything seemed to be the wind at your back, and as a footballer you were making some big strides. So but on a broader point, back to Norwich, that was potential there and of course at that stage of the Championship season, we look back now and Norwich had a healthy cushion by the end, but of course in those months where you still had plenty of games left to play, the likes of Bournemouth and Watford snapping at their heels, they were the type of games that they had to get the points on the board, just to give them that breathing space, just to almost deflate the opposing clubs trying to chase them down, because any encouragement, I'm sure there would have been clubs come out of the pack, and who knows how that season would have panned out. So that was, for me, maybe in microcosm, that was Norwich's Championship season last season. They wasn't the cut and thrust, free-flowing Championship title winners of the 2 seasons prior to that. The Millwall game here at Carrow Road, where it was entertainment and goals guaranteed. It was a far more attritional march than that title, and that typified it. A day like Cardiff away, where they had to, win the battles before they could show their quality, and we saw that side of Norwich far more maybe than the free-flowing. Of course, as I say that, I'm thinking immediately the 7 or 8 goals they put past Huddersfield later in the season, but that was the exception to the rule. I think that season was very much, maybe because of the backdrop to fans still barred from the stadiums and all that went with that it was a roll your sleeves up type of season, and ultimately that performance we're talking about there was a roll your sleeves up win.
Yeah, the one I always go back to is the 2-1 win at Rotherham, when Krill saved the penalty, which would have made it 2-0 to Rotherham. And they did. They ground out. That's certainly how they built the confidence of the title win long term. It was on grinding out results, and then they eventually were able to sort of run away with it a bit, weren't they? I'm following on from that win, 2-0 home win against Bristol City when Hugo scored both goals. The FA Cup 4th round 1-0 defeat at Barnsley, Pad. That was a grim day, wasn't it? Shut down with rain, freezing cold. Let's not spend any more time on that one. It was rubbish. And this was the wobble, Connor, wasn't it? Maybe that was the first sign of it, really. You had the 0-0 at home with Middlesbrough, when Warnock just told Daniel Fisher, their right back, just to man Mark Buendia, literally tracked him everywhere on the pitch, didn't he? It was horrible. The 0-0 at Millwall, again, another horrible one. I think that was one we couldn't go to as well, wasn't it?
That one, yeah.
You were at that one? Yeah, I was just one of us who was able to get in,
well, having said that, though, you've just popped into my head. And as we all know, we had to go through quite stringent, well, not stringent, but temperature checks at every ground we went to, and in this period, and obviously a lot of clubs as well insisted on sort of questionnaires, COVID questionnaires. And having filled all that out, I've driven down, bitterly cold day that day, had the heating on in my car, pull up outside Millwall, took my temperature, and I was apparently on the cut line for being allowed into the ground, to the extent where I had to park up, get out, half an hour in the fresh air, and then took my temperature again. And thankfully I was below the threshold that permitted me access to the stadium. So
you do like to pump up the heating in the car, though, don't you?
Yeah, well, yeah, and it nearly was to my detriment on that particular occasion. I think it was a night game from memory as well. So that's what I remember about Millwall. I couldn't tell you too much else from that drab 0-0 affair. Yeah,
it was a Tuesday night. Yeah, I think it was pretty grim. Norwich were in a sports hall, weren't they? Had a temporary dressing room in a sports hall across the road. And then the one that we'll all remember, 2-0 defeat at Swansea, which is what allowed Brentford to actually knock Norwich off top spot. So that was a Friday night. Again, long trip to Wales, so we decided not to go, didn't we, with the sort of COVID situation at the time. We decided it was on telly. It was better for us to just do what the fans were doing and monitor it from a distance. So if I take you back to that, Connor, that was, it was preceded by, a 9-game winning streak, I think it was. But at that time, wow, people were worried, weren't they?
Yeah, it was a major wobble, wasn't it? Because of what Paddy said. They looked so efficient, they looked so effective. It just looked like it was very business-like, wasn't it? The way they were going about the Championship. They were turning up, they were They weren't blowing teams away, but they were winning, and they were winning games on the whole pretty comfortably. They had probably the two best players in the Championship in Emi Buendia, three probably, Emi Buendia and Ollie Skip. You could throw in a lot more, I'm sure, out of that side.
When there are 5 Norwich players in the Championship team this season.
Exactly. I've narrowed it down to 3, but you can easily make the case that they did have the 11 best players in the Championship, but certainly the 3 standout ones. And yeah, this felt like we saw what Neil Warnock did. Tactically, got it absolutely spot on that day in the 0-0 draw. Millwall it's always a tough place to go, the Den, even without fans, and the pitch wasn't great, the weather wasn't great. There was a chance right at the end, wasn't there, which Millwall should have scored. I want to say it was an error now, but to be honest, my memory's a bit hazy from the behind closed doors games.
Yes, there was one sliding in at the back post, wasn't there? They just had a counter right at the end.
Did Jed Wallace have a decent chance?
There was a few, as I recall now. In that final quarter, Norwich were literally clinging on.
Farke was furious, wasn't he?
The balls were getting fired across. I think there was a few mad blocks. I think Hanley and McLean threw himself at. They were probably on balance fortunate to come off the pitch with a draw that night.
Yeah, and then obviously the Swansea defeat felt like the kind of felt probably the low point within that run, really, because it was a defeat. It was against a promotion rival. That was an error as well, wasn't it? The first goal, was it Tim Krul who made that error? Again, that
McLean gave it away, didn't he? And Horan picked it up. Oh no, that was
There's
the corner.
That
was the second goal.
Yeah,
Krul dropped the corner, didn't he?
Yeah. So again, it felt at that point like, hang on a minute, maybe Norwich aren't as good as we thought they were. Maybe these players aren't going to make of this what we thought they were. And then obviously I can see the run in front of us now. It's just lots of green, and within that run, the game that I felt it probably fairly early on, but the game that really hammered home to me, they're going up, basically, was the Brentford game, where they won 1-0, and there was a lot of pressure that night. It was, I think Brentford was second, it was Top Beat second, and there was a lot of noise from the Brentford end, and Norwich were very professional in the way they managed that game. It was an Emi Buendia goal, wasn't it, I think, if I remember.
Yeah, from the edge of the box.
Yeah,
one of his several left-footed finishes.
Exactly, and that's the quality that they had, and that he had. He was capable of winning matches pretty much single-handedly last season, and the rest was history, really. But that particular run, I remember they lost that Swansea game, and as you say, last season I covered pretty much all bar probably 3 or 4 away games at home. So I'd have been sat on my desk with my slippers on, following on iFollow or Sky or whatever, and I remember shutting my laptop down. For they could blow this here. They could go, because once we know the Championship too well, and you get in a rut like that and you get in a run like that, it can be very, very difficult to get yourself out of it. Similarly, at the moment, you're seeing Fulham and Bournemouth go through it in the current season. It seems every team has a run like this in the Championship at some point. It was a really difficult night. It was on telly as well, so that probably made it a little bit harder for Norwich fans, because it was in a national, in front of a national audience. Emi Buendia, that was a game he missed, wasn't it, for a red card?
That's what I was just thinking. We didn't mention that, did we? That he was sent off in the Borough game, wasn't he? And he missed the Millwall and the Swansea game. So we were back in that territory, weren't we? That Norwich can't win games without Buendia, and it was sort of proven by it came to an end by they bounced back from the Swansea defeat by beating Stoke 4-1 at Carrow Road, and Emi's back and running the show. And then you've got a 9-game winning streak, which, if I'm remembering correctly, that was the first time that Norwich have ever won 9 games in succession. But they did win 10 league games in succession in the 86 title winning season. I think I'm getting that right off the top of my head. But there were some cup defeats in the middle of that run, weren't there? So it's the first time that Norwich had ever won 9 successive games in all competitions. And Paddy, we went to St Andrews twice in space of a week, didn't we? 2-0 win over Coventry, and then a 3-1 win over Birmingham, which was quite strange. 1-0 win over Rotherham, again that sort of result. Wickham, 2-0 at Wickham at the end of February when we got sunburn.
That's right, yeah, we did. Yeah.
we went all wrapped up, didn't we? Because it had been so cold recently, and then we just got bathed in sunshine the whole time. And I remember been stood interviewing Buendia after the game, and it was like July. It was ridiculous. So that was a strange one. And then, of course, that Brentford win, as Connor mentioned, which really, they'd reclaimed control by that point, and they just kept moving through the gears. 3-0 at home to Luton. I can't say I remember that one especially. I remember Sheffield Wednesday,
That's
though,
a big
Pad.
one for me, yeah, because they were 1-0 down that day, weren't they? In the first half, they were off it. They weren't good enough at all. And the 2 goals they scored were of the highest quality. I mean, Cantwell, for all his struggles at the minute, what a finish that was. Outside of the box, right-footed, like an arrow, top corner, back across the keeper. And that was the winner. Timu Pukki had got them back on level terms with an unerringly accurate finish as well in that right-hand channel of the box. And I remember, actually now, that was because, again, the mechanics of the COVID situation at the minute, we don't tend to, certainly with the managers, post-match have a face-to-face. It's normally through technology, through Zoom. But that game, Daniel was actually pitchside, and it was a face-to-face post-match interview, and I remember distinctly that, you know, you could almost see on his face he felt that was a big day, that, because first half they were nowhere near it, and in fact, I've just seen the Wednesday goal scorer, a certain Jordan Rhodes, 7 minutes in. So the script was probably written in a very negative way for Norwich that day, but to turn it round, and the quality of the 2 goals they scored that day, I think, there was still a bit of work to do, but that felt like a big afternoon, I think.
Then it was Forest a few days later, and I remember I was being sat there again, empty stadium, and we hear Emi's not in the team. It's like, here we go again, because thankfully, for good reason, that time his wife was giving birth, wasn't she? So, and it had been in the early hours, so he wasn't in the team. But on that occasion, Kieran Dowell was fit, and he came in, played in Emi's position, scored a brilliant goal, set up the other. They won 2-0 at Forest, and by that point, we're thinking, right, it's a case of when rather than if, isn't it? They're certainly going to get promoted. They should be winning the title from here. They're a little bit of a wobble. 1-1 at home to Blackburn, and then that bizarre game after the international break at Preston on the Good Friday, which didn't get postponed, did it? When Ollie Skip and Max Aarons, I certainly remember, would have had to have played twice in 48 hours, wouldn't they? And Max didn't travel, Yanoulis didn't travel, Skip was just on the bench. That would have been on Obamidele's surprise debut, wouldn't it, Connor, actually, thinking back to it.
Yeah.
Mumba came in, Kintia came in. But the fact that they should have won that game, shouldn't they? And there was a really cruel late goal on sort of Mumba and on Obamidele. But that sort of, the fact that they dealt with it showed their sort of poise, I suppose.
Yeah, and their resilience as well, I think, and that was probably a key point last season. It never really felt, even when teams would score first or they'd score late on like that, it never really felt, apart from that run that we spoke about a little while ago, like it particularly affected them or knocked them off course. It kind of felt like it was so businesslike. They had a plan, they knew what they were doing, they knew they were going to execute it. It was almost like they let off a nice arrogance about them, that even though they were drawing games against Preston in what was bizarre circumstances, the draw against Blackburn, which was when Ben Gibson got injured, wasn't it? It just felt like that they'd come back and win the next one because they had too much quality in that team not to, and it felt like a team that knew that as well. I mean, you've just flashed up the Huddersfield game as a perfect example of that, but just on that Forest game, I mean, that could have easily have turned out the way this Huddersfield game did, because Norwich had so many chances that night and were so good, and it was hang on, maybe they can play without Emi Buendia. But that Huddersfield game is as dominant a game of football as I've seen. I mean, Norwich were brilliant, particularly that first half. Looking at now, Pukki hat-trick, Buendia, Cantwell, Dowell. I mean, the four of them were electric. I think it was Dowell's goal, wasn't it? Where
computer goal.
It made it 5, didn't it? Just before the break.
It was sensational. It would have been surreal if fans would have been in the ground, but it was even more surreal without them. It felt at points like kind of a training ground exercise, but what a training ground exercise, and what a joy to watch. It was it was brilliant. And for all the games in that season that maybe merge into one a little bit, because I was watching them on the screen or we were watching them here at Carrow Road, and some games where it's 1-1 or something, it's very difficult to recollect anything. I think that's a game that will stand out in my head for forever, really, just because of the quality of football that Norwich City played and the goals that they scored, which were, for the large part, absolutely incredible. I've not seen a team that on it probably certainly not a Norwich team that on it in the Championship. It was, for me, one of the best performances I've seen a Norwich team produce, in terms of dominance, in terms of quality, in terms of the goals they scored. It it was exceptionally good. And then you kind of get the reverse of that a few days later, don't you, at Derby, where it took a set piece and they had to do it a different way. And this is what really I come back to. They were effective, they had quality, they knew they had enough. Whether it was brilliance like in the Huddersfield game, or whether it was an individual moment of quality as Kieran Dowell produced against Derby, they knew they had it. And when they produced it, it was very difficult, near impossible to stop, I would argue. And I think a lot of teams found that obviously to their detriment throughout the season.
Yeah, it was a wonderful free kick from Dowell, it really was. And we basically knew after the 7-0 that they were going to be promoted, didn't we? It was almost getting to the point of mathematical then. And I remember being at Derby, Pad, and Sky were there, weren't they? They turned up with a camera crew because that was the first chance for them to get promoted. But I think Watford probably won the lunchtime game, so they didn't even stay to see the game, did they? They were like, oh, right, never mind then. And they went. They didn't even stay to report on the game. So I presume it was to live broadcast or whatever, Norwich's potential promotion celebration. But still, they got the 1-0 win. And then this bizarre, surreal day that I'm sure none of us will forget, fans, reporters, players, everyone, when they get promoted before the evening kickoff against Bournemouth, which turns out to be a 3-1 defeat and a pretty weird performance because Bournemouth still needed the points and Norwich, then the pressure was almost off. And we turned up here a few hours early, didn't we? And I remember doing our live video. I was pitched up out at the front, wasn't I? And it was just a surreal day. I think that's the word we used mainly, wasn't it?
Well, also, I mean, the thing that immediately I'm looking, as you've got the fixtures there, they were promoted 5 whole games before the end of the season. That's how dominant over the piece and relative to the clubs behind them they were. That, and obviously they were promoted by not kicking a ball. Was it Watford failed to win earlier in the day? There was something happened earlier in the day that sealed Norwich's promotion, wasn't it?
Can't remember exactly. Yeah, I think there might have been a late equaliser.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, but irrespective, Norwich arrived, and I think from memory, all the players and the coaching staff would have been at their Park Farm base as it was then, watching the game.
Yeah, Watford lost 1-0 at Luton, which is the local derby, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that sealed it. So you can imagine how surreal that would have been, and then you flip that, and the opponents are a Bournemouth team who are coming like a train, really strongly with a playoff push under John Woodgate as it was, with a lot of quality. I mean, they'd lost their way, obviously came out of the division, Premier League, took a while to sort of find the right gear, but you looked at some of the players they had, the likes of Brooks, Dan Juma, excellent players from the Championship level. So
he scored such a good goal that night.
Yeah, you pull all the strands together, it wasn't probably a huge surprise that Norwich's motivation levels probably weren't anywhere near Bournemouth's that night, and maybe the party had already got started. And to take it right back to what you said at the start, at the end of that game, how more surreal that you've lost the game 3-1, and the players, I think, went back inside and they all came out and they had those obligatory "we're going up" banners, and that
didn't know what to do at first.
No, it was because there's nobody in the stands other than us hacks. So when we weren't really going to be celebrating with them, so that probably just underlined sadly where we were last season. That a moment of what should have been euphoria and shared joy with 25,000 Norwich fans was a pretty empty, hollow experience.
Yeah, it's a brilliant, obviously very busy time for us, but it's brilliant. I think we did get a beer right at the end of the night, didn't we? It was probably 11 o'clock or something by then when we were sort of starting to wind down, and the club media staff said, there's a few beers left over, do you want one? And we finally got to sort of have 5 minutes and just talk about, bloody hell, what a season it's been, and seeing all those great photos, Ono Hernandez unveiling his tattoo and the craziness in the dressing room. But that 5-10 minutes after the final whistle, they were so disappointed with their performance. They were like, well, do we celebrate? Like, they just couldn't quite get their heads around it. And then we always had a repeat a few days later when they lose 1-0 to Watford, and all the fans are out there, aren't they, celebrating, partying, and again, that was a bit of a better performance, but They let themselves go from there, and then the season sort of rolls to a close. They won 3-1 at QPR. I've got ahead of myself, haven't I? It was after the Reading game. Yeah. It was after the Reading game when the title was wrapped up, wasn't it? The 4-1, and Javi Quintilla back in the team.
That's a goal.
Yeah, lovely goal. The free kick. And he scored at QPR as well, hadn't he? And then it all came to a close at Barnsley, at Oakwell. Mario Vrancic, Alex Tete, all the emotional goodbyes, the tears. I mean, this is why I wanted to review it all, because when we're sort of sat where we are at the moment in terms of Norwich being bottom and all the things that we started talking about right then in April and May about, it's the Premier League, how is it going to be different? Will it be different? Have they learned their lessons? The jury's sort of still out on that. We'll talk about that a lot in the months to come, I can guarantee you. But, just to reflect on that a little bit, the big goodbyes, and that was the start of a big turnover that summer.
Yeah, I think if you'd have sat there in January and said, we'd be sat here just before Christmas, Daniel Farke wouldn't be here, Emi Buendia wouldn't be here, Ollie Skip wouldn't be here, maybe that one less of a surprise, Alex Tettey, Mario Vrancic, Marco Stiepermann, the list goes on. It's some big names in recent history that are no longer here. And I guess that maybe contributed to the new feel that they wanted around the group and the squad. Philip Heiser,
yeah. No light now, I was going to throw in. It would have spoiled the mood.
Yeah.
Tommy Tribal.
It's a good job on Hernandez left a bit of space on that Norwich City tattoo, I think. He might have another year to fill in next year, but let's hope not. It does feel very bizarre. Like you said, it's very difficult for me to, as we kind of delve through the games, to really pinpoint specific moments within games because, and I guess that's what maybe the fans would have felt like as well, because although that greatness happened in that season, they weren't there to see it. It was almost like a simulation. You were watching it on a screen. You were watching Emi Buendia dance around 4 players every week, making the league look far too good for. Or him being far too good for the league. It was very strange, and then they come back and it's Premier League football again. It's the same struggles as to when they kind of left, really. It's been a funny old year because even though it was good on the pitch, it probably wasn't as good as it should have been because of everything that happened. And likewise, even though this season hasn't gone the way so far that maybe we hoped it would, the fans have been back, and at least they've got to see some players who weren't. I mean, seeing Emi Buendia in an Aston Villa shirt was very bizarre. So, yeah, it's when you sit down and reflect on it, it's been a very bizarre year. I keep coming back to that Gattuso quote, which I won't quote directly, but people can Google it. It's along the lines of sometimes maybe good and sometimes maybe, and I'll let the M word fill in, and that's kind of what it's been like, really. But as a period of football, really positive, I think, for Norwich City. And I think if you'd have offered a lot of Norwich City fans in January the chance to be sat in December, sort of 3 points adrift from safety in the Premier League, I think they'd have taken it.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I won't dive into too much of this season, but obviously we saw all of those transfers. Gibson and Yanulis being made permanent, Norman, Kabak, Sargent, Jolis all came in reasonably late. Gilmore being signed from Chelsea amid a lot of fanfare. Lise Malou, they really. When that transfer window closed, I know there's been plenty of criticism of Stuart Webber and Farke and whatever in the months since, but certainly my feeling when that transfer window closed was that they'd shown the ambition, they'd spent a lot of money, and that they brought in a lot in. But ultimately, we saw it was such a poor start to the season for various reasons. Again, can't avoid COVID. They had the outbreak in pre-season and all that sort of stuff. And now we sort of reached the point where we're assessing the next chapter has started, hasn't it? But we still don't know what kind of chapter that's going to emerge to be in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, all bets are off at the minute. Okay, we're coming off the back of 3 defeats under Dean Smith, but the first 3 games of his reign, 5 points, really should have been probably a full house. They were very good against Southampton and Wolves, and then Newcastle, not quite at the levels, but what an opportunity they squandered that night. 10 men at Newcastle for 80 minutes, and Connor said it's a lot of ifs, but they don't feel a million miles away. For me, they certainly feel a lot closer to being competitive than 2 seasons ago at this level, where I think by this stage you were beginning to fear for them. Teemu Pukki had got that injury earlier in the month of December at Leicester, was never the same player again. We didn't know it, but we were just on the cusp of some seismic events in terms of the pandemic, and it was a very slow, sad descent for a number of reasons back to the Football League. I don't feel we're on the same trajectory, but at the risk of repeating what I said right at the start, these next 3 games probably will frame the mood music going into 22. If it's Norwich in with a shot, and if so, can they push on, or is it almost maybe internally rather than the public messaging about, and we've just spent a huge chunk of time talking about the Championship, is it about preparing again for another Championship season, and which players are going to be with them on the journey? You would expect Smith will still be there, you'd expect Webber will still be there because their contractual status is. So is it about putting the building blocks in place for another possible turnover of players in the summer to come and crack on again. But you hope it's the former rather than the latter. And for me, I think it is too early still. Even though they're in a pretty parlous situation, it is still too early to predict doom and gloom. But 5 goals from Timu Pukki, 8 in total from the entire team this stage of the Premier League season. That needs to change dramatically. The whole COVID situation, these injuries that have been piling up, there's echoes of 2 seasons ago, and you just hope that a little bit like there was a clear parallel between those last two championship seasons under Daniel. Both ultimately ended in title wins. Let's hope by May that we're not talking about the parallels between the last 2 Premier League seasons, which ultimately were a bridge too far and maybe not having the requisite quality in the squad to be competitive at this level. I certainly hope that isn't the case.
Yeah, let's hope we're sat here in a year's time recording another podcast and Norwich are still in the Premier League and we're not talking about bloody COVID anymore. But unfortunately we cannot bank on that, and as the way things stand, let's just keep it in the short term and hope that we don't go back to behind closed doors, because this little chat has brought back some bad memories. We're such a privilege that we were able to be there, and we took that privilege seriously and responsibly, and we did our best to provide as much coverage as we could, but we didn't enjoy a great deal of it, and I don't think the players and the coaches enjoyed a great deal of it either. It's their job, they've got to crack on. But
it's the lost season, Dave, and that's not trying to be twee or blasé about it, but in years to come, yes, in the records of Norwich's proud club honours, it will show championship title winners 2020-21, but the memories, I'm afraid, will fade because the shared experiences, which is what it's all about following your football club, were just not available to supporters. So it is sad, but that was the reality, and in that context, the work that this football club did to navigate a path through that, and we've not even got into the financial elements and how they weathered those currents from not having the revenue that they would have got from supporters being in the stadium. Irrespective of how this season plays out on the pitch now, you can't underestimate what a huge achievement it was to come through all that and be back in the Premier League.
We haven't even mentioned the club crest has been redesigned. The soccer bot was opened. There's always stuff going on at Norwich City. It's very rarely dull. Let's just hope, I think, as we've just emphasised, really, that new heroes can be created quickly. New exciting memories can happen in a flash, and equally it can go the other way pretty quickly. So who knows what's lying ahead in the months ahead, but we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening as ever. Have a great Christmas as best as you can make it, as much as we're all having to be that little bit more sensible as COVID bites back and things. But fingers crossed we are all continuing with the football and that we're able to proceed safely, and that we've got plenty to talk about in the months ahead without having to talk about behind closed doors games. But thank you very much for listening throughout this year. And if you fancy a little, you're not sure what to get a loved one in your life, and you think, I could just get them a PinkUn Plus subscription for the year, then who knows, that might just keep Dad happy for the year ahead. Then head over to PinkUn.com. There's a tab on the top of the homepage which has got the full details of PinkUn Plus where you can subscribe. But for now, thank you very much for listening. We will be back with you across the channels of the PinkUn channels on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and PinkUn Plus and our websites for the Arsenal game on Boxing Day. So we will catch up with you then.